how do you feel about as far as the deaths today in superheroes? Because I mean, every week, Jim, you know, if you're in the industry, so every week, I mean, we just had Johnny Storm, you know, bite the dust a couple of weeks ago, Human Torch. How do you feel about it? So it's done today more out of the point to basically sell books. Where when it was done with you, in the graphic novel, it was done because it was this good story. It was something to be told. They wanted to kill off the character because they wanted to tell a good story. How do you feel about the characters just dropping off just basically every week now?
Well, it diminishes death itself as a story element because you know that if Batman dies, which I guess he did last year, he's going to be back.
Yes,
I'm sure he's back already, isn't he?
He is, yes, he's back.
Yeah. I remember everybody got upset with this soap opera called Dallas when it turned out this guy wasn't dead.
Patrick
and
Duffy,
it's
right?
basically the same thing. You know, I mean, it doesn't have any impact because it doesn't have any importance. It's just, this guy's going to be out of the series for a while.
When Captain Marvel was killed off, there was no talk of, how we're going to bring him back in a couple of years, or...
No, in fact, Jim Shooter said put out an edict that character wasn't going to be brought back while he was in and he stayed dead for a long time. I guess there's a Skrull running around now that's supposedly Captain Marvel, but I guess the real guy's still dead.
So far.
Which is, I guess, a testament to how good the story was.
You're also a very big part of another famous death, which was Jason Todd. So how did that come about, and how did you feel about killing off Jason?
Well, I always thought that Batman shouldn't be running around fighting crime with a kid that he dresses up in bright primary colors and then sends them out ahead of him while he's hiding in the shadows in his gray outfit. That always struck me as child abuse. So when I started writing Batman, I tried to avoid using Robin. And Denny O'Neil was always saying, you got to put Robin into the story. And so we did a few times. But at the time, I was lobbying heavy to get rid of him. And then Denny came up with this idea about the phone call thing and said, hey, I got this great idea. Let's vote on whether Robin dies or not. And, of course, I thought for sure he was going to die because, quite frankly, I know what ghouls you fans are,
Right.
I figure the only thing that surprised me was how close the vote was. There was only like about 70 votes between him living and dying in the actual thing.
And how many of those were you calling in?
Not a one. I was in Mexico at the time. I finished writing the job and then took 6 months off and ran down to Mexico for a while.
What lies at the edge of the universe? Go beyond.
Hi, I'm Dave Finch, and you're watching InvestComics TV.
So we're back with InvestComics TV, and Martin will lead things off.
Okay, well, Mr. Starlin, we talked about your work on the first Marvel graphic novel, The Death of Captain Marvel, and we know the third one was Dreadstar, but in between prior to that, there was Epic Illustrated Magazine, which was kind of, an experiment for Marvel at the time.
It was Archie Goodwin's little baby, yes.
Okay.
Archie was the editor-in-chief at Marvel, and it became more work than he wanted to do. And they didn't want to lose him, so they said, what would you like to do? And he said, I'd like to do something like a heavy metal magazine. And that's how Epic Illustrated started off.
Great. And you were on the ground floor with that first issue, correct?
I wanted to do I was experimenting on gray boards with black and white ink and paint. And I wanted to do a fairy tale. Believe it or not, the Metamorphosis was supposed to start off as a fairy tale. I wanted to do, smiling little elves and stuff like that, but I don't do smiling little elves very well, and it ended up going into where it became, which was kind of this grim Holocaust kind of story.
With instructions of the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah, what can I tell you? I'm not Mike Flug,
But then that led into, like we said, the third Marvel graphic novel, Dreadstar, which then became the flagship series for, I guess, the Epic line of comics. And how did that come about?
Archie wanted to expand. Marvel was losing some of their best talent to creator-owned publishers, and this was their way of getting us back.
Okay.
There were some contracts that had to be worked out, and over a 6-month period, I basically had to learn what latches innovations were and all sorts of other legal terms. And with Mike Hobson and Jim Shooter and Mike Friedrichs for a short while, hammered out the contracts. It was really quite an odyssey. We'd all agree on something, then we'd go up to Marvel's legal, and then we'd come back, and legal had changed it all back into a work-for-hire contract, and so we had to start all over again. But we eventually ironed it out, and it was about the best deal anybody had in comic books for the longest time.
Sure, that wasn't really a royalties. That was kind of a percentage?
Oh, it was a direct royalty, yes.
Okay, and that was...
On things that were creator-owned, on things like Marvel, it was an incentive, they called it, because royalties would have got into legal problems.
All right, okay, because I guess they owned those characters. But then you owned Dreadstar, and then something strange happened with issue 27. It wasn't published by Marvel, it was over at First Comics. How was that experience working with First?
That was good. First was a pretty good publisher while they lasted. They went off and invested into other things like plays and that, and that's why they eventually bellied up, because their other finances went. But during the time I worked with them, Rick Obadiah was a pleasure to work with. I'd go out to Chicago and go out in the sailboat with them, and we had a great time. I got eventually tired of drawing Dreadstar, and I wanted to go off into the novels, so I eventually got off Dreadstar. But, all in all, it was a pretty good experience working with them.
Sure, and then you handed the book eventually over to Peter David.
Yes.
Correct. How did that come about? I mean, your baby you kind of spent 10 years working on, you eventually just handed over to Mr. David, who was on it for about a good 20, 30 issues. And
it went to Malibu Comics, right? You went from...
Yes, eventually went to Malibu after First disappeared. Peter had been writing some Spider-Man issues. I liked them. I knew him while he worked in the sales department up at Marvel. Eventually, we needed a writer, and his name came up, and I said, oh, yeah, he'd be terrific for it. And he proved to be just that.
Sure.
Those are very nice issues he did. It got a little strange when Dreadstar became a woman, but,
do you plan on bringing back Dreadstar any time soon, or are we going to see Dreadstar again? It would be great, because I loved the book growing up. I thought it was spectacular. I loved it with Epic and First. It was great.
I have a final Dreadstar story I want to do. I think after I finish Breed 3, that may be the next thing on my plate. I've got some novel work I have to do ahead of time, but I think the next, and maybe my final comic book job, may be the final Dreadstar story.
Wow, that's interesting. What do you mean by your final job?
9 years, drawing a whole book is really hard. I mean, I do everything. I pencil and ink and write it, and I'm coloring it now.
Wow.
I'm working on this one series now that I had a nice deadline on, and then I hurt myself and I got laid up for 2 months. And now I'm like having to get 3 pages out a week, and it's grueling.
You hurt yourself? What happened? You have an injury?
Yeah, I blew out 3 vertebrae in my spine. One so bad that a piece of it flew off and is floating around inside of me still somewhere.
Oh my God, really?
What happened?
I was at a funeral. I was asked to be a pallbearer at a funeral in South Africa, and it was a Orthodox Jewish funeral, and plain wooden pine box, rope handles, and we were okay until we got to the gravesite, and they had a couple of planks laid on either side of the board and on top of the shifting sand. And so we walked off across the planks to lower the coffin into the grave, and this guy who was directly across from me in the front, his yarmulke blew off. And rather than just letting it go, he went after it.
Oh, man.
And left me holding the front end of the coffin, which I ended up falling into a squat, thinking, I just can't let this thing fall into the grave like this head first. And doing that, holding the whole thing, I blew out 3 vertebrae. I didn't really realize just how bad it was for a day or so, but by the time I got back here in the States, I couldn't move. And for about 2 months, I was laid up.
Wow, really? So, I mean, how are you feeling now? Are you feeling a little bit better?
My back is fine, but now I went and sprained my ankle playing racquetball. I can't win. I was spending this whole winter mending.
Oh man, that's terrible. You gotta be careful there. All right.
You sound like my wife.
Yes. Well, we all love you, Jim, so we want you around. So be careful, will you? We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to wrap this up, and we'll touch on what you're doing currently and the future for Jim Starlin. Okay? We'll be right back.
Okay.